Before we go any further, we're going to allow some time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to give you a cue, and if you have something you want to ask the panelists, if you could step up and line up over there. And we don't have a mic, so I'm going to have to repeat your question, but maybe we can, and hopefully I'll not edit it too much. But let me introduce you to the panel. To my immediate left is Sienne Josselin. Next to her is Dean Sherriff. Next to him is Jasmine Alexia. And at the far end and ready to run out the door is Benton. And I'm Tim Burgard. Hi, how you guys doing? So generally, let's get the most popular question out of the way. Most people, when they ask us something about, or they find out we're in this business, they want to know how we got started. So call it an origin story. And I'd like to go from this side to the other. So Sienna, you want to start?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you Comic-Con, ADG and Tim. So how I got started. Well, I wasn't planning on becoming a storyboard artist. That's not what I thought my trajectory was. I was a very naive Midwestern girl trying to get out of the Midwest and head to my California dream. And so I left everything behind. I had a former career in hairstyling, and I sent myself to art school, hoping to be an illustrator. I didn't get into art school when I got there, but I eventually found myself at Cal State Long Beach, absolutely loved it there, and tried to be a self-made illustrator doing my own thing. And it really wasn't happening for me, but I ended up starting this group called Ladies Adventure Club out of LA and trying to connect with other artists and other women. And I was posting my artwork, and one of the girls I had met was like, hey, your artwork is pretty awesome. Would you ever consider doing a commercial? And it happened to be doing a tattoo on Danny Trejo. So that was a fun little introduction. So Danny Trejo and I had matching tattoos, and for a couple days, and that was pretty awesome. And then she asked me again, hey, my husband works with Sunny Boy Entertainment, and they are looking for someone to do boards. Do you do storyboards? And of course I was like, yes, I do. And the only things I'd ever boarded were really just stuff for my husband for fun, who writes, who's a writer. And we just whipped up a couple of boards. I did some homework over the weekend, read some books, practiced some perspective drawing, just brushed up on some skills, did a little homework, turned in some boards. They brought me in, they really liked me, and we talked about my work, and they said, okay, great, well, we'd love to have you on. It's gonna be boarding for ancillary projects for the movie It. So that was my first foray into this, and I was like, holy, I can't do this in my mind, but I just went for it. I just kept doing my homework. I just kept trying to like draw, get better. I worked my butt off, and I absolutely loved it, learning on the fly. And I just kept putting it out there, and I kept drawing and kept telling people this is what I do, and I ended up being a storyboard artist, and I freaking love my job. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So Dean, it's your turn.
Hello. My name's Dean. Thanks for coming. I started as, I went to art school in Toronto and studied advertising illustration. And that's kind of what I was planning to do. Maybe I thought about architecture at one point. But then I got into doing advertising, and I kind of got tired of that. And then I was doing some newspaper editorial work as well. Worked at the newspaper for a while, doing editorial stuff, like, you know, getting people calling me, you know, at night on the phone, threatening me they didn't like my drawing. I was very offensive, you know, stuff like that happened. But then I started thought about, well, who are the best artists you can work with? And it was like people working in animation. So I kind of thought, if I could get work in animation, I've made it. And so I started working in animation, and that kind of just trickled. Like what I was doing in animation was more like designing, background design. But when I actually kind of thought about film the whole time I was doing it. Like, how can I make this more cinematic? And they're like, just draw backgrounds, come on. So I eventually just kind of met some friends, and they said, you should probably work in the film industry because your stuff's kind of that way. So I presented it to some art directors, and the first movie I got was X-Men 2. So that was kind of like a big deal for me. And it was like it wasn't on very long, but I did some props. I wasn't doing any backgrounds or anything, any stuff like that. But that was kind of the break-in. And then I just kind of kept doing that from then on. And, it's
Just kept doing it.
just kept doing it, yeah.
It's sort of like a snowball rolling downhill. It just got bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, Jasmine?
Can you hear me now?
How's this? Okay, so I just knew I liked art and design and movies. So I went to film school and I would just figure it out. So working in film school, all they talk about is getting a job. So I just thought, let me get a job while I'm there. So my first job was an internship in Paris at the Independent European Film Festival with the director, working as his assistant, and he on the side made commercials. So my first job, I kind of got to just see how really fast productions run in the independent market in Europe, which is kind of crazy. And I liked Europe a lot, but then I decided to come back to America and work in TV and movies, and I guess now I'm here. I started as a PA, and then I just worked my way up from junior to senior illustrator.
Wow, okay. Benton?
So when I was growing up, my big ambition was to be the next Neil Adams. I wanted to be a comic book artist so bad in the worst way. And so, from like second grade, drawing Legion of Superheroes and blah, blah, and all that stuff. And then in 78, or rather 77, a movie came out called Star Wars that kind of blew everything away. And I learned about guys like Macquarie and Joe Johnston. So growing up through my teens, I had those mainly my ambition was to be a comic book artist, but also I always had, working on the next Star Wars and sort of like as another possibility, maybe years later or something. But I did a little bit of stuff while I was in high school doing, local newspaper stuff. And then I went to the Academy of Art, and I always had this interest in old comic strip art of guys, really good drawers like Stan Drake and Leonard Starr. And there was a illustrator who was a storyboard artist named Stanley Fleming, and he drew just like those guys. And I showed him my portfolio on a brown bag lunch that they would have illustrators speak during lunch at one of those things, and they called them brown bags. In any case, he saw my work and remembered my work because the work had a similar look to the kind of stuff we both enjoyed. And then by the time I was a senior in art school, I guess Stan had been asked to work on a project storyboarding it was for Epcot Center. It was called Body Wars. It was one of those rides, simulator rides. And so I got a call in from the dean at the illustration department. Somebody from ILM wants to talk to you. So I was like, shit, yeah. So I found out that Stan had recommended me, and then I worked on that, and that led to my very first feature film, which was Ghostbusters 2. And so the time that I was on that was sort of right at the cusp where traditional visual effects were sort of making way for computer visual effects. And so I was at ILM for 13 years before I moved down to Los Angeles and went freelance on my own and joined the union. And my first film here in South Bay was, or Southern California here was Terminator 3. So that's kind of the trajectory, and I because I had those interests, it was what got me here. And so it's been a lot of fun.
All right, Benton. And I did it exactly the same way as Benton did. Everybody, the whole thing. No, I didn't. But I did start doing comic books. I knew I met somebody at a science fiction fantasy art show that used to be held in Orange County, and named Rick Hoberg. And as he started advancing in the business, I ended up assisting him, and he did some stuff for DC. I kind of helped him out on some backgrounds and stuff on that. He was doing stuff for the animation industry, and I ended up helping clean up his storyboards because he's super fast, but they have a thing called being on model, where you have to have the model sheets and they want all their characters to look like that. So I ended up drawing all those characters that look like that. And eventually, my first regular job was at Hanna-Barbera while it was not owned by everything else, like TBS or Turner Broadcasting, or eventually Warner Brothers. And so and then I transitioned through commercials into working into live film, and eventually I worked on Stargate. And it wasn't union to begin with, but it became union, and I had 30 days on it, which is back then, and maybe even now, if you work on a show and you have 30 working days on it, you become union eligible, which is maybe a nice little thing to sock in the back of your head if you're thinking about that. Although I will stop right there and tell you that it has never been easier, not to denigrate anybody's skill level to get into this job, but they've made it a little bit easier to get into working in the business these days, because it used to be you needed to either work on a show and then it turned union, or everybody in the entire union was already working and so they could hire somebody who isn't in the union, or so right now, if there's nobody in the union working on the current production, they can hire one person who can do the job, which is the whole point. Because if you can do the job, we want you in the union. We want you to be in the business. So eventually I got into that, and then of course I hit the gravy train, and I'm independently wealthy, and of course I'm lying out of through my teeth. Okay, this is a little bit unusual, this particular panel, because I can ask a question that we've all been through, lockdowns and everything else, and I wanted to ask the panels that how it affect, working on the job, how it affect getting work, how it affect when you're actually working, and maybe what it looks like currently in the business. So, would you like to speak a little bit about that, Sienne?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, so COVID, wish it was
COVID, yes.
Before COVID, I was called to come on and see if I would be interested. Would I be interested in working on Doctor Strange 2? So I was like, bleep, yes. So I was on that project, and then COVID happened. I also didn't know at the time that I was pregnant. So I had my little superhero hanging out with me, sneaking a peek on all the fun stuff I was doing. And it was awesome. It was awesome being able to, generally I work remotely, which, in non-COVID times. So I'm pretty used to being fairly isolated, working in a studio or being nearby set. And I loved being able to walk onto the Disney lot up into the Marvel Studios every day and just every nerd loving their job and being there. So when COVID happened, it was super hard to say goodbye to people and work remotely because just the energy at Marvel was super vibing, and that was a really hard transition. And then I had my baby, so that was also very crazy. But I worked until I popped that kid out, and I was definitely missing and craving the community that being in pre-production, when you're in that space, allows that creative back and forth. So that was a bit hard, but it also allowed the opportunity to get really creative. So I'm at home now, like, where could I bump up my self-care? How can I physically take care of myself? How can I have set up a dope studio? Like, who other artists could I be connecting with right now who are on the same boat, and trying to stay connected as possible. So I tried my best to adapt and stay healthy and do my thing. And COVID was hard because there was a little bit of a dry spell, and personally for me, I'm not represented, so when COVID happened and I got into the guild at that time, it was really hard to connect with other guild members and connect on other projects, because by connecting and networking, we're all collaborating and getting to know each other and bring on people we know to projects. So that was hard to not, to be a part of getting into the ADG and not really getting the full experience of it in person. But I hustled my little butt off and reached out to people and tried to find projects I wanted to work on, and some I didn't get and some I did. So we're still kind of in that phase, but it's been good to finally come back to set. And so now I'm on set in Hawaii working on my other dream job, Chief of War for Jason Momoa, and it's great. It's great to be back in person. So it's a nice thing to come back to. So we're trying. We're doing the best we can with COVID. And it's working, but it's definitely a challenge. It still has its challenges.
Okay, yeah. Well, you met all of us, so you spread out your network a little teeny tiny bit. All right, Dean.
Can you hear me? Okay. The biggest thing for me was not having to commute across town. Can you hear me? Hello?
Commute.
Yeah, commuting across town. I was
Dirty word.
Yeah. I was working at Sony, so I was riding my bike across town, and then COVID happened, and I looked around, and other shows were kind of getting out of there, and I started packing up my stuff, and people were like, "Is this your last day?" And I'm like, "It's all our last day, actually." So I got out of there, and then so for me it wasn't that different, because often when I'm in an office, I'm kind of isolated, working on my own. so it was actually. I actually felt more productive, and I think I got a lot more done, and I think I was a lot more focused, and so for me it actually was a good thing, because I got, I think I was able to kind of just dial in on some of the stuff I wanted to work on, different projects. So yeah, that's the difference. It was not a negative thing for me. It is a little isolating. Sometimes you just want to be able to talk to people, and sometimes the Zoom thing doesn't work, and so that's a bit difficult, and often you're kind of working kind of in a bubble. You don't really know what you're doing. So as far as what you don't really know if you're actually, how people respond. You can't see their faces, so it's a bit weird that way. But I don't think it's been. I think it's been okay for me, but it wasn't that much different, because when I worked as an advertising illustrator, I was working out of my office or home. And I was kind of isolated then too. So, yeah, that was
Okay.
COVID for me.
It's there's some common thread between all of us, I think, because at home we have our favorite toys, and we resent having to take them out of our place and bring them somewhere else. So so in a way you could do your best work, but again, it's because this is an industry of communication, and sometimes just getting the lag time between when you think you heard exactly what you need and you're doing your beginning roughs and stuff like that, and then you find out you miscommunicated entirely and you spent like a couple of days doing the wrong thing, it really helps to have that immediate feedback that we don't quite get, because you have to establish like an appointment at a time to get the call to do the thing, and then how about you, Jasmine? Do you have any stories?
Yeah, when the pandemic started, I was in Chicago working on Station 11. You were in Hawaii. I was in the peak winter of Chicago. So.
I'm from there. I lived it.
Yeah.
Ooh, I can taste the
from there,
sour grapes
too.
from here.
But yeah, so I was in Chicago fighting for my life and drawing in between. And when the pandemic started, it became there was that awkward phase where people didn't know how to communicate with each other. So it went on a pause. And I linked up with a production designer that was just kind of like, you seem like someone into video games. What if we tried to do something VR? So on his show, we started loading in the sets in VR, and then I could walk through the space in VR, scanning locations, 3D, and you just put on the headset, and it's like you were there. So that was really cool, because I never even thought about that before, and then I just became really knowledgeable about virtual reality within months.
So that was Unreal Engine?
Yeah, you can make the model in Unreal and AutoCAD, I think.
All right,
Load it in there.
For those of you who are game players, that's the way that a lot of the video games or computer games, that's my age right there, I said video games. The computer games are done, and a lot of the stuff from the computer gaming industry has gotten into Hollywood, and currently movies like the remake of The Lion King and The Mandalorian, and a lot of the stuff from Disney Plus and whatever, they set up this virtual reality thing, and the director, the cinematographer, the storyboard artist, all these people can actually go in there and add stuff and add stuff into it. So that's sort of the future of the whole thing. So we're all gonna be avatars. And 500 pounds sitting in a Barca lounger or something. That's our life coming. All right, Benton?
So I guess the main thing for me was, well, I don't think it was a huge change from COVID, because I think a lot of stuff has been moving to working remotely anyway in terms of storyboard artists. But I at least before would be able to go in and have a meeting, and if you could look at the set or look at the model, and you kind of go around and feel it, or there might be a model on the table and you can look around it, or if you're on location, you can actually be on the set, which is a whole lot different than, I actually kind of hate talking on Zoom, because I don't like diddling around with buttons. I'm kind of a computer phobe in a certain sense, but it's also a lot of stuff is really difficult to talk about and explain. I remember I was working with Nikki Caro on a project, and she gets her left and her right mixed up, self-admittedly, all the time, and so we would be talking about, oh yeah, well the camera moves over here, and then I move over to the left, or then he moves over to the left, and then over to the right, and we're getting left and right mixed up, because usually I would be in a room with her, and I would just look at where she's putting her hands up like this, and it's here to here. Now it's like I can't really go through the screen, and it just becomes kind of confusing. So I also kind of, I just really miss sort of like the human interaction, where I could just sit there and draw it and make the corrections, in front of the director, and then also the whole thing with, you're kind of dealing with the director's schedule, and instead of just being there you can, if you can't talk to the director, you can talk to somebody else, and have sort of that cross-pollination with everybody else who's on the set. If you can't ask the director, you might ask some, the stunt guy or whoever it might be who you're working with. So there's definitely disadvantages to working remotely, and but you adapt, and you make do with the best you can. So so I think they're probably going to get used to it. It's probably cheaper, but I really kind of miss the old way. I hope it sounds like, Sienne's going to Hawaii and stuff like that, so that they are bringing us back. But I definitely miss the old interpersonal, face-to-face way of talking with the director. So.
Well, when you get to travel, that's one of the perks. That's also one of the disadvantages, whether it's okay to be taken over to Albuquerque, New Mexico, or if it's a punishment. Hawaii, pretty good. I've been to Australia. I've been to 3 major cities in Canada. I've gone, different places, but, I've worked on several projects recently. They're all in Georgia, all in Atlanta, and it's been a while since I've set foot over there, and it's means that I can still teach at Art Center and everything else, so my life gets to stay about the same. I do kind of miss being on set, because if you're a board artist, there's nothing quite the same as being on a scout with the director and you have your own camera in your hand and you can take shots in all the places from the perspective that you're going to draw it, as opposed to work from about a bunch of photos and in different camera lenses and try and figure out what it's going to look like on the day. So it really is a little bit of a different world. I hope they still have, when we are able to, I guess, put a cork in our mouth that takes away all the COVID and we can go anywhere we want to. Hopefully that'll come back a little bit. I would like to ask anybody who have questions to, find their way up here. And in the meantime, well, I'd like to be able to hear you. So if we can move over here. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when you say working remotely, does that mean pretty much anywhere in the country outside California? Or like basically for those artists working in, say, the Midwest or Chicago, like what were the odds of being able to find work and not moving?
Okay, you're saying not just what is remote, but how can you find jobs when you're working remotely? Is that it?
Well, I understood it's like if you said working from like Chicago, are you based in Chicago? Yeah, so I actually had to move. So it's like we have unions. So you have to work where there's a local union. So there's a East Coast, a West Coast, there's one in Atlanta, and I think there's one in Chicago. So as long as you work in a film hub that has its own local, then you should be able to work.
Also, if you get representation, like at least if you're getting started, it helps to have an agent that, especially for commercials, because ad agencies that are looking for people to work storyboards, they don't spend a lot of time looking. They just go to these agents like Storyboards Acre, it's now Ampersand, Frameworks, all these different places. And they pick you out of a menu like a hot dog or a taco, they just go. But, that's a way of, but they send these books with, and they make contacts with ad agencies all over the country, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. And if you can work remote, you might get a job from anywhere. I've worked for places all over the country. I didn't have to necessarily go there. So if that helps. I was actually that was one of the questions I had over there that I was going to give up, but thank you. You actually, essentially, it's like, do you have any favorite projects that you really enjoyed, the work?
Yeah, like where you were able to really impact it, or really proud of your creative contributions.
You're very happy with your contribution. Okay. Benton, since you got to leave soon, let's start with you.
I guess I got a couple. I mean, for me, one of the things I'm most known for working on was the Phantom Menace Darth Maul battle with the Jedis, and being a big Hong Kong martial arts fan, and that they wanted in that style of fighting. That was like most fun for me. Also, there was another time where in terms of being most impactful, I suppose. There was a scene in Pirates of the Caribbean that took place, or on Stranger Tides. Is that 4 or 5? I don't remember which one. But it had the mermaids in it, and they were supposed to go up on the beach and fight the pirates. And they had already set up sort of a thing where the mermaids, when they get up on the beach, if their legs become dry, then they start to become human. And so they would be naked women running around on the beach. And so we needed to find a way to have them be able to battle but without having naked people running around. So they didn't really know what to do, so they just asked us to come up with ideas. And then the one I came up with was basically for the mermaids to lead the pirates into the water with a net and all that stuff. And so basically, I boarded that sequence and it seemed to go over well. And so that's more or less how they used it. So that was fun to be able to sort of contribute in that way.
All right, Jasmine, you have a project you really like doing?
I don't know. I think like lately I've kind of got niched as like a combat action storyboard artist. I've been in a lot of fight sequences. So I've done a lot of fun stuff like cars chasing. So I just finished Wakanda Forever, and then another Paramount movie, Finest Kind, and then I got to learn about fishing boats and like go out to Boston on location to learn how to fight on a boat. It was just fun.
So what's the biggest fish you caught?
No, we learned how to scallop.
Oh, we went for scallops.
Yeah, even the actors had to learn. It was very important.
Oh, cool. I think I liked scallops. All right, Dean?
I think for me, it's like because I do a little more like concept stuff, I think when you kind of approach it like you're kind of giving some opportunities to kind of like what's it going to look like color-wise, what's the mood going to be like, what's the design going to be like, and you have some play in it, then it's really fun to see that they actually use that the cinematographer looked at it, the costume designer looked at what you're doing. I think when you see that and it ends up in the final film, you're like, that's cool. I think that's really rewarding when you they actually take what you're providing them and they actually use it, and you actually made a big contribution visually. It's fun, yeah. But not particular one film. They're all kind of interesting in different ways.
Okay, Sienne, you got something?
Yeah, gosh, lots of fun stories. I think the one of the few that comes to mind is Doctor Strange 2. I was actually working with Scott Derrickson. Benton was on that with me, and when we were on that with Scott, it was awesome to be able to work with him, but also that I got to draw America Chavez. That was like to be able to draw her for the first time and introduce her. That was amazing. I felt very honored to be able to do that, but also they were like, this is kind of what we want. Like, go home and just throw bleep at the wall and see what happens. So I got to play. I got to have so much fun. I threw so many different sequences at it. They loved all the ideas. We just kind of had to narrow it down. And, although it didn't go on screen and it's a different movie, it's still an awesome movie. But, I thought maybe after doing this, the recognition would feel really good. But I really feel at the end of the day, it was the collaboration and be able to work with people who are really awesome and really passionate about it. And I just finished working on Magazine Dreams with Elijah Bynum, and just to be able to have a working relationship and you're speaking the same language and you're jiving and you're creative, and it makes it much more energizing to go back to the drawing board and really put stuff on paper and see what happens. And so it's nice to not only have it's awesome to do great stuff, but sometimes even the stuff that you put out, it's like, oh, great, next shot, like that looks great, and they don't say anything. So I really do find the collaboration and the connection and really just jiving and flowing the most rewarding part of the job.
I got a bunch of things that I really liked for different reasons, like The Patriot. You got to draw people riding horses, fighting with swords. But as far as the work as it appears in the film, I really can't beat Jurassic World, where the dinosaur stuff I drew, it really comes through. You know, the actual storytelling actually comes through in the film. You know, because a lot of times when you storyboard something, they change so much, it really, you can't tell anymore. Just one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. I do want to say, 3:30, we're going to be at the portfolio area, and if you want to talk to us there, that's great. But we'd really like to see some of your work if you're carrying it around with you. So,
Sign up, though. They have to sign up.
they have to sign up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then they can sign up. I don't know how many people are waiting for us, but the sales pavilion. Actually, that's all I know because we have to be led by the nose over there. I don't know where it is. Yes.
My name is Hussein Tarek. I'm artist from 25 years. And my question is, I'm foreign, I'm not from America.
Yeah.
But from I'm a child, I follow Disney all the time. Disney is my dream. And for me, it's foreign market. I don't know how can I start it. I don't know how can I enter to the market. I have the talent. I have the tools, but I don't know how to enter the market. And what is the market like? Which company?
Oh, you know what? This really sounds like a portfolio question because that's what we're going to be discussing is getting into the business and what you need to get into the business. If you're already an artist, then, you know, whatever rendering talent you have is probably good enough. It's just how you get through there. And that's probably a little bit more in the weeds than you know, and they're also telling us that we're done. But come and see us. All right. Thank you very much for coming over. I hope it was illuminating, and I hope it's not another 3 years before we see you again.